The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over Phoenix, Arizona, casting sharp shadows across the cracked sidewalks of the Maryvale neighborhood. Margaret Thompson adjusted the two heavy grocery bags in her arms, feeling the plastic handles dig into her weathered palms. At 73, these weekly walks to Morrison's Market had become more challenging, but she refused to give up her independence. 5 years had passed since Harold's death, and maintaining her routines was one of the few things that kept loneliness at bay. The heat shimmered off the asphalt as Margaret turned onto Cypress Avenue, a quieter stretch that cut through an area where several businesses had closed over the past decade. An abandoned automotive shop sat behind a chain-link fence, its windows boarded up and covered in faded graffiti. Margaret had walked this route hundreds of times, never thinking twice about safety. Maryvale had changed over the years, but it was still home. She didn't notice the two young men watching from the shadow of the abandoned building until it was too late. "Hey, old lady!" The voice cut through the afternoon stillness, harsh and aggressive. Margaret's heart jumped. She turned to see two figures approaching rapidly, both in their early 20s, wearing baggy jeans and hooded sweatshirts despite the 90-degree heat. The taller one had a thin beard and cold, calculating eyes. The shorter one kept glancing around nervously, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Just keep walking," Margaret whispered to herself, picking up her pace. Her orthopedic shoes scraped against the concrete as she tried to move faster, but the bags weighed her down. "I'm talking to you!" The tall one, Tyler Brooks, closed the distance in seconds, his hand shooting out to grab Margaret's shoulder roughly. Margaret stumbled, her grip on the grocery bags loosening. "Please, I don't want any trouble," she said, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound firm. "Then make this easy," Tyler snarled, his breath reeking of cigarettes and something chemical. "Give me your purse, now." I only have a few dollars," Margaret stammered, clutching her worn leather purse tighter against her side. Inside was her late husband's wedding ring, the only piece of him she carried everywhere. "Please, just let me go." Jake Morrison, the shorter accomplice, shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, man, just grab it and let's go," he muttered, his eyes darting up and down the street. "Shut up, Jake." Tyler's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, yanking at Margaret's purse strap. The force sent her spinning, and she cried out as her shoulder twisted painfully. "Stop! You're hurting me!" Margaret's voice cracked, tears beginning to stream down her weathered cheeks. Tyler ripped harder, and the straps snapped. Margaret, off balance and terrified, fell backward. Her hip hit the concrete first, sending a spike of white-hot pain through her body. The grocery bags exploded around her, cans rolling into the gutter, eggs splattering across the sidewalk, bread loaves cushioning her fall but doing nothing to soften the impact. "Got it!" Tyler held up the purse triumphantly, already unzipping it to rifle through the contents. Margaret lay on the ground, stunned and hurting, unable to process what had just happened. The world seemed to tilt around her. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. Pain radiated from her hip, and she wondered dimly if something was broken. That's when she heard them, the deep, rumbling thunder of motorcycle engines. 5 bikes rounded the corner onto Cypress Avenue, their chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. The riders wore leather vests emblazoned with a patch showing a phoenix rising from flames, encircled by the words, "Desert Guardians MC Phoenix Chapter." At the front rode a man in his late 50s with silver-streaked dark hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and the bearing of someone who had seen combat and survived. Marcus "Doc" Callahan saw the scene unfold before him in an instant. The elderly woman on the ground, groceries scattered everywhere, 2 young punks with a purse in hand. His eyes, sharp and grey as gunmetal, narrowed. He raised his left hand in a clenched fist, the signal to stop. All 5 motorcycles roared to a halt within seconds, their riders dismounting with practiced precision. "What the hell?" Tyler froze, his bravado evaporating as 5 imposing figures strode toward him. "Drop it, now!" Doc's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute authority. He didn't shout, didn't need to. 22 years in the Marine Corps had taught him that real power didn't require volume. Jake took one look at the approaching bikers and bolted, sprinting down a side alley without looking back. Tyler clutched the purse tighter, his mind racing. He was cornered, outmanned, and suddenly very aware of how badly he'd miscalculated. "This ain't your business, old man. You made it my business the second you put your hands on that woman." Doc took another step forward. Behind him, the other 4 riders spread out, effectively cutting off any escape route. Jessica Rivera, a 32-year-old EMT with dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, immediately moved past the confrontation toward Margaret. "Ma'am, don't try to get up yet," she said gently, kneeling beside the fallen woman. "My name's Jessica. I'm a paramedic. Can you tell me where it hurts?" Margaret's eyes were wide with shock and fear, tears still flowing. My hip. I don't understand." "You're safe now," Jessica assured her, her hands already performing a quick assessment. "Raymond, call 911 and get an ambulance here, now." Raymond Foster, a tall African-American man with kind eyes and a deep voice, already had his phone out. "On it," he confirmed, stepping away to make the call. Tyler made a desperate lunge to his left, trying to squeeze between 2 of the bikes, but Danny Chen, compact, quick, and trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, moved to intercept. Tyler swung wildly with the purse, but Danny easily sidestepped, caught Tyler's arm, and used the momentum to spin him around and pin him face first against the chain-link fence. "Don't move," Danny said calmly, holding Tyler in place with minimal effort. Christine Walsh, a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and tattoos covering both arms, picked up Margaret's purse from where Tyler had dropped it. She walked it over to Jessica and Margaret. "I believe this belongs to you, Ma'am." Margaret's trembling hand reached out to take it, clutching it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much." Doc knelt down on Margaret's other side, his weathered face softening with genuine concern. "Margaret, is it?" he asked, having spotted her name on a prescription bottle that had spilled from her purse. "I'm Marcus Callahan. Everyone calls me Doc, former Navy corpsman, so I know a bit about injuries. Jessica here is the real professional, though. You're in good hands." I was just walking home," Margaret said, the reality of what had happened crashing over her. Her whole body began to shake, the adrenaline giving way to shock. "I know," Doc said gently, "but you're going to be okay. We're not going anywhere until we know you're safe." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer. "Police are 2 minutes out," Raymond called over. "Ambulance is right behind them." Tyler struggled against Danny's hold. "Let me go, man. I didn't do nothing." "You assaulted a senior citizen in broad daylight," Christine said coldly, her arms crossed. "You did plenty." Within minutes, the street filled with flashing lights. 2 Phoenix Police Department cruisers pulled up, followed quickly by an ambulance. Officers emerged with hands on their weapons, assessing the scene. "Who called this in?" demanded a tall female officer with sharp features and sergeant stripes on her uniform. "I did, Sergeant," Raymond said, stepping forward with his hands visible. "Raymond Foster. I witnessed the assault along with my riding club members." Doc stood up slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Marcus Callahan, Desert Guardians MC. We were riding through when we saw these 2 attacking this woman. One ran off down that alley, about 5'9", white male, black hoodie. This one," he gestured to Tyler, still pinned by Danny, "is the one who knocked her down and took her purse." The sergeant's posture relaxed slightly as she took in the scene. The elderly woman being tended to by paramedics who had rushed over with their equipment, the scattered groceries, the bikers standing protectively around the victim. "Detective Amanda Price," she introduced herself, pulling out a notepad. We're going to need statements from all of you. Whatever you need, Doc confirmed. As the paramedics carefully loaded Margaret onto a stretcher, she reached out and caught Doc's hand. Please, she said, her voice still shaky but determined. Don't leave. I don't have anyone else. The vulnerability in those words struck Doc somewhere deep. He glanced at Jessica, who nodded. We'll follow you to the hospital, Doc promised, squeezing Margaret's hand gently. You're not alone. As the ambulance pulled away, Detective Price approached Doc. Mr. Callahan, I need you and your people to come down to the station to give formal statements. Absolutely, Doc agreed. But we'd like to check on Margaret first, make sure she's okay. Price studied him for a moment, then nodded. St. Joseph's Hospital and Medical Center. Give your statements there. I'll have officers meet you. And Mr. Callahan? She paused. Thank you. If you hadn't been here. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone present knew exactly how much worse it could have been. The fluorescent lights of St. Joseph's Hospital Emergency Department buzzed overhead as Doc and the other Desert Guardians sat in the waiting area. Their leather vests drew curious and sometimes nervous glances from other visitors, but the group sat quietly, respectfully, waiting for news about Margaret. 2 uniformed officers had taken their statements 30 minutes earlier, and Detective Price had called to say she'd be by later to follow up. Tyler Brooks was in custody, charged with robbery, assault, and elder abuse. A patrol unit was still searching for Jake Morrison. Jessica paced near the reception desk, still in her EMT mode, despite being off duty. The intake nurse said they're doing x-rays of her hip and shoulder, she reported, returning to the group. Could be a couple hours before we know anything. We wait, Doc said simply, leaning back in the uncomfortable plastic chair. Christine looked at him thoughtfully. Doc, you know we've got that charity ride planning meeting tonight. We're supposed to finalize the route for the Children's Hospital fundraiser next month. Reschedule it, Doc said without hesitation. Raymond nodded in agreement. Margaret needs people right now. Meeting can wait. Danny, who had been quietly scrolling through his phone, looked up. I did some checking. Margaret Thompson, widowed 5 years ago. Husband was Harold Thompson, died of pancreatic cancer. She taught 3rd grade at Desert View Elementary for 37 years before retiring. No kids, no close family listed in any records I could find. So she really is alone, Jessica said softly, her heart aching for the elderly woman. Not anymore, Doc stated firmly. 2 hours passed before a doctor emerged, looking tired but professional. Family for Margaret Thompson? Doc stood up immediately, the others following his lead. We're here for Margaret. How is she? The doctor, Dr. Nathan Cross, according to his badge, hesitated. Are you relatives I can only discuss patient information with? They saved my life. Margaret's voice, weaker than before but determined, came from behind the doctor. A nurse was wheeling her out in a wheelchair, her right arm in a sling and her face pale with pain and exhaustion. Please tell them whatever they need to know. Dr. Cross nodded, understanding. Severe contusion to the right hip, but no fracture. That's the good news. Sprained shoulder, some bruising and abrasions. We're keeping her overnight for observation given her age and to manage the pain, but she should be able to go home tomorrow with proper care and follow-up. Thank you, Doctor, Margaret said quietly. As the doctor walked away, Jessica immediately crouched beside the wheelchair. How are you feeling? Pain level? They gave me something strong, Margaret admitted, her words slightly slurred. But I'm scared to close my eyes. When I do, I see them coming at me again. Doc pulled over a chair and sat directly in Margaret's line of sight. That's normal after what you went through. It's called acute stress reaction. Your mind is processing trauma. Margaret looked at him with watery eyes. You've experienced this? Many times, Doc acknowledged. Combat does that to you. So does any violent attack. What you're feeling, The fear, the replaying of events, the shaking, it's all your body's way of trying to protect you. Will it go away? Margaret asked, a tear sliding down her cheek. With time and support, yes, Jessica interjected gently. But Margaret, you shouldn't be alone tonight or for the next few days. Is there anyone we can call? Family? Friends? Margaret shook her head slowly. My sister lives in Seattle. We talk on holidays, but we're not close. My friend group, they've gotten smaller over the years. People move, get sick, pass away. She laughed bitterly. That's what happens when you get old. You lose everyone. Ma'am, with respect, that's not going to happen here, Raymond said, his deep voice warm and reassuring. We don't abandon people who need help. A nurse approached with paperwork. Mrs. Thompson, we're moving you to a room on the 3rd floor. You'll be more comfortable there. As they wheeled Margaret toward the elevators, Doc walked alongside her. Do you have someone who can help when you get home tomorrow? With groceries, meals, getting around? Margaret bit her lip, clearly struggling with the admission. No, but I'll manage. I always do. Not this time, Christine said firmly but kindly. Give us your address, your phone number, and a list of anything you need. We'll make sure your house is ready for you. I can't ask you to, Margaret began. You're not asking, Doc interrupted gently. We're offering. Big difference. Detective Amanda Price arrived just as they reached Margaret's assigned room, a semi-private space with one empty bed and a window overlooking the parking lot. Price was in her late 30s, with sharp intelligence in her brown eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen too much violence in her career. Mrs. Thompson, Price said, approaching the bed where nurses were settling Margaret in. I'm Detective Amanda Price. I need to ask you some questions about what happened today, if you're up for it. Margaret tensed visibly but nodded. Yes, of course. Would you like your friends to stay? Price asked, noting how Margaret's eyes immediately sought out Doc's face. Please, Margaret whispered. For the next 20 minutes, Detective Price took Margaret through the events. What time she'd left her house, the route she'd taken, the first moment she'd noticed Tyler and Jake. Every detail of the attack. Margaret's voice shook throughout, but she answered every question as thoroughly as she could. The one who ran, Jake. We haven't located him yet, Price explained. But we will. Tyler Brooks is being very uncooperative, refusing to give us his accomplice's full name or address. We have him on video from a nearby business's security camera, though, so it's only a matter of time. Will they come after me? Margaret asked, the fear raw in her voice. For testifying? Tyler Brooks is going to prison, Mrs. Thompson, Price said with certainty. We have multiple witnesses, physical evidence, and video footage. This is what we call an airtight case. And when we find Jake Morrison, he's going away too. Morrison? Doc repeated, his brow furrowing. Same last name as that market Margaret shops at. Price nodded grimly. Jake Morrison is the grandson of the owner of Morrison's Market. Frank Morrison is devastated. His grandson has been in trouble before, but nothing like this. Frank's already said he'll cooperate fully with the investigation. Margaret closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her. I just wanted to buy milk and bread. That's all. Just groceries. Jessica gently squeezed Margaret's uninjured hand. Get some rest. We'll be here when you wake up. You don't have to... Margaret tried to protest. Room's got 2 chairs and a couch, Danny observed, already claiming 1 chair. We rotate shifts. You're not waking up alone and scared in a strange place. Detective Price pulled Doc aside as Margaret drifted off to sleep, the pain medication doing its work. Mr. Callahan, what you and your club did today, that was heroic. But I have to ask, your club, the Desert Guardians, you're not affiliated with any criminal organizations? Doc met her gaze steadily. Detective, we're a veterans riding club. 70% of our members served in the military. We organize charity rides, visit VA hospitals, and mentor at-risk youth. We're registered as a non-profit with the state of Arizona. You're welcome to run background checks on every single one of us. Price nodded, seeming satisfied. I will, standard procedure. But off the record, Phoenix needs more people like you. She handed Doc her card. Mrs. Thompson is going to need support through the legal process, victim advocacy, court appearances when this goes to trial. If she's really alone, like she says, having familiar faces will help. We'll be there, Doc promised. Price left, and the Desert Guardians settled in for the night. True to their word, they rotated shifts. 2 people awake at all times while the others caught what sleep they could in the waiting area down the hall. Every time Margaret stirred or woke with a frightened gasp, someone was there immediately to remind her she was safe. At 3 in the morning, Margaret woke from a nightmare, crying out. Doc, on watch with Jessica, was beside her in seconds. You're okay, Margaret. You're in the hospital. You're safe, he said calmly, his voice cutting through her panic. Margaret's breathing gradually slowed as reality returned. She looked at Doc with wonder and confusion. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Doc was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. 6 years ago, my wife Linda was in a car accident, bad one. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and I barely left her side. Our club brothers and sisters, they brought me food, sat with her when I had to step away, made sure we weren't alone. His voice grew rougher. Linda didn't make it, but those people, they carried me through the darkest time of my life. That's what community does, Margaret. We show up for each other. Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different, tears of gratitude, of being seen and valued. I don't know how to repay. You don't repay kindness, Jessica interjected gently. You pass it forward when you can. That's all. The next morning brought better news. Dr. Cross cleared Margaret for discharge with strict instructions for rest, physical therapy, and pain management. As a nurse went over the discharge paperwork, Christine returned from a supply run with bags full of items. Got you some easy-to-prepare meals, a grabber tool so you don't have to bend down, a shower chair, and non-slip mats, Christine announced, setting everything on the bed. Raymond and Danny already went to your house to make sure everything's secure and set up. Margaret stared at the supplies, overwhelmed. How much do I owe you? Nothing, Christine said firmly. Club fund? We use it for situations exactly like this. An hour later, Doc was driving his pickup truck, borrowed for the occasion since Margaret couldn't ride on a motorcycle, through Margaret's neighborhood with Margaret in the passenger seat and Jessica following on her bike. The modest single-story ranch house at 4257 Saguaro Lane had a small, neat yard and an American flag hanging by the front door. Raymond and Danny were on the porch, having just finished installing a new motion sensor light and reinforcing the screen door's lock. Place is secure, Raymond reported. We also mowed the lawn, watered the plants, and stocked your fridge with groceries to replace what was lost. Margaret's lower lip trembled as Doc helped her out of the truck and steadied her with her new walking cane, another supply Christine had thought to purchase. I don't understand. Why would you all do this? Because it's right, Danny said simply, and because we can. Inside, the house was clean and welcoming. Photos of Margaret and her late husband Harold covered the walls. Their wedding day, vacations to the Grand Canyon, anniversaries, a lifetime captured in frames. Jessica noticed Margaret's eyes linger on a particular photo of Harold in his Navy uniform, young and handsome. He was Navy, Jessica observed. Doc was a Navy corpsman. Harold served on the USS Nimitz, Margaret said softly, easing herself onto her couch with a wince. He was so proud of his service. It shaped who he was. Doc studied the photo with respect. "He looks like a good man. The best," Margaret whispered. "I miss him every single day." Over the next 2 hours, the Desert Guardians made sure Margaret had everything she needed. Medications organized in a pill organizer, emergency numbers posted by every phone, Christine's personal cell number on the refrigerator. They demonstrated how to use the shower chair and grabber tool, showed her the panic button Raymond had installed that would alert both the police and the club if pressed. "Tomorrow, Jessica will come by to check on you and help with anything you need," Doc explained. "We've set up a rotation schedule. Someone will visit every day for the next 2 weeks or longer if needed." "I can't believe this is real," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face once again. "Yesterday I thought I was going to die on that sidewalk, and today I have all of you." Christine knelt beside the couch, her tough exterior softening. "Margaret, you're part of our family now. That's what this patch means." She pointed to the Desert Guardian's emblem on her vest. "We protect our own." As the sun set that evening and the Desert Guardians finally headed home, Margaret sat in her living room surrounded by evidence of strangers who had become guardian angels. She looked at Harold's photo on the mantel and whispered, "You'd like them, honey. You'd like them a lot." 2 weeks passed, and the Desert Guardians kept their promise. Every single day, at least one club member visited Margaret, sometimes 2 or 3. Jessica came most mornings to help with physical therapy exercises the doctor had prescribed. Christine brought meals and stayed for lunch, sharing stories about her own journey from troubled youth to responsible adult. Raymond, who worked as a contractor, repaired several things around Margaret's house that had needed attention for years. Danny taught her basic self-defense moves she could do even with her injuries, emphasizing awareness and escape over confrontation. And Doc came every evening, usually around 6 o'clock, to sit on the porch and talk. It was during these evening conversations that Margaret began to truly heal. Not just physically, but emotionally. The nightmares still came, but less frequently. The fear that had seized her whenever she heard unexpected sounds started to fade, replaced by a growing sense of security. On a particularly pleasant October evening, with the Phoenix heat finally breaking into something tolerable, Margaret and Doc sat on her porch, sipping sweet iced tea. Margaret had progressed from the walker to just using a cane for stability, and the bruises had faded from angry purple to a yellowing brown. "I got a call from Detective Price today," Margaret said, watching a neighbor walk their dog down the street. "They found Jake Morrison. He was hiding at his girlfriend's apartment in Tempe." "That's good news," Doc responded. "Justice served." She also said the trial date is set for January. "I'll have to testify." Margaret's hand shook slightly as she raised her tea glass. "I'm terrified, Doc, having to see them again, having to relive it all in front of strangers." Doc set down his own glass and turned to face her fully. "Fear is natural, Margaret. But remember, you're not the same person who was attacked that day. You're stronger now, and you won't be alone in that courtroom. We'll be there." Margaret studied his weathered face, the silver in his beard catching the fading sunlight. "Can I ask you something personal? Always. Why did you leave the Marines? After 22 years, you could have kept going." Doc was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. "Linda got sick. Cancer. The same disease that took Harold, actually. She needed me home, not deployed to some desert halfway across the world. So I took early retirement, came back to Phoenix, and took care of her for 3 years until..." He didn't finish the sentence. "I'm so sorry," Margaret said softly. "After she died, I was lost, angry at the world. The Desert Guardians saved me, gave me purpose again, helping people, being part of something bigger than my own grief. It brought me back from a dark place." "And now you're saving me," Margaret observed. "No," Doc corrected gently. "You're saving yourself. We're just making sure you don't have to do it alone." The sound of motorcycles approaching made them both look up. 5 bikes pulled into Margaret's driveway, the regular evening crew, but this time they were joined by several additional riders Margaret hadn't met before. A tall, barrel-chested man with a full grey beard dismounted first. He wore a vest with a president's patch, marking him as the chapter leader. "You must be Margaret Thompson," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such an imposing figure. "I'm Richard Kowalski, president of the Desert Guardians Phoenix chapter. Everyone calls me Kodiak." Margaret struggled to stand, but Kodiak waved her back down. "Please don't get up on my account. I came by to meet the woman who's been taking care of our road captain." "Taking care of Doc?" Margaret looked confused. "He's been taking care of me." Kodiak's eyes twinkled with amusement. "See that right there? You giving him purpose, someone to watch over. That's taking care of him in the way he needs most. Doc's been better these past 2 weeks than I've seen him in 2 years." Behind Kodiak, a petite Asian woman with silver streaks in her black hair stepped forward. "I'm Grace Chen, Danny's mother and the club's treasurer. I also brought you something." She held out a card. "The club took a vote. We'd like to make you an honorary member of the Desert Guardians." Margaret took the card with trembling hands. Inside was a certificate declaring her an honorary Desert Guardian, signed by every club member. Tears blurred her vision. I don't deserve this." "That's exactly why you do deserve it," Grace said warmly. "You've shown incredible courage and grace through a traumatic experience. You've welcomed us into your life and your home, your family, Margaret." Over the next hour, Margaret met more club members. Victoria Martinez, a high school teacher who reminded Margaret of her own teaching days. Kenneth Hammer Harrison, a gentle giant who worked as a youth counselor. Patricia Walsh, Christine's mother, and a retired police officer. Michael Foster, Raymond's younger brother, who was studying engineering at Arizona State University. They brought food, laughter, and stories. Margaret's small living room filled with the sound of people who genuinely cared about each other, and she found herself laughing more than she had in years. These people, with their leather vests and motorcycles that had once seemed intimidating, had become her family. As the gathering wound down and people began to leave, Patricia Walsh pulled Margaret aside. "I heard you've been having nightmares still," she said quietly. Patricia's cop instincts had picked up on the shadows under Margaret's eyes. "I went through something similar after a shooting when I was on the force. Have you considered talking to someone? A therapist?" Margaret hesitated. "I grew up in a generation that didn't really believe in therapy. You just pushed through." "And how's that working out?" Patricia asked, not unkindly. Margaret sighed. "Not well, if I'm honest. I jump at shadows. I can't bring myself to walk past that spot where it happened. I rearrange my entire day to avoid it." Patricia pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "Dr. Sharon Brennan specializes in trauma therapy, particularly for seniors. She helped me process my PTSD. Let me give you her number. At least think about calling." Margaret took the number, tucking it into her pocket. "Thank you, Patricia. I'll consider it." That night, alone in her house but somehow feeling less alone than she had in 5 years, Margaret looked at the honorary membership certificate. She traced the signatures with her finger, pausing on Doc's strong, clear handwriting. Then she pulled out Dr. Brennan's number and before she could talk herself out of it, made an appointment for the following week. 3 days later, Margaret sat in Dr. Brennan's comfortable office in Scottsdale, a box of tissues within easy reach, and a kind-faced woman in her 60s listening attentively. "Tell me about the attack," Dr. Brennan prompted gently, and Margaret did. She told the story from beginning to end, including details she hadn't shared with anyone, how she'd wet herself in fear, how she'd thought about Harold and wished he were there to protect her, how she'd felt shame and weakness and rage all mixed together. "Those feelings are completely valid," Dr. Brennan assured her. Trauma isn't logical, Margaret. Your brain experienced a life-threatening event, and now it's in overdrive trying to protect you from future harm. That's why you avoid the location, why you startle easily, why sleep is difficult. Your system is stuck in survival mode. How do I unstuck it? Margaret asked, exhausted from the emotional release of finally speaking everything aloud. With time, with support, which you clearly have, and with work. We'll use something called EMDR therapy, along with cognitive behavioral techniques. It won't be easy, but I can help you process this trauma so it doesn't control your life. Over the following weeks, Margaret committed to therapy twice a week. Dr. Brennan guided her through the painful work of revisiting the attack in a safe, controlled environment, helping her brain reprocess the memories so they became less triggering. The Desert Guardians continued their steady support, adjusting their visits based on what Margaret needed most. Jessica accompanied Margaret to physical therapy appointments, cheering her on as she regained strength and mobility. Christine took Margaret shopping for the first time since the attack, staying close but allowing Margaret to push through her anxiety. Raymond built Margaret a beautiful security gate for her backyard so she could sit outside without feeling exposed. And Doc remained her evening companion, the one person she could be completely honest with about her fears and her progress. I walked past the spot today, Margaret announced one evening in early November. Doc had just arrived with Chinese takeout, Margaret's favorite from Golden Dragon across town. Doc set down the food bags and gave her his full attention. How did that go? Terrible, Margaret admitted with a shaky laugh. I cried. My hands shook so badly I had to sit on the curb. But I did it. Jessica was with me and I did it. That's not terrible, Margaret, that's brave as hell. Doc's pride was evident in his voice. Dr. Brennan says the only way to take back my power is to stop letting fear dictate my choices. So tomorrow, I'm walking to Morrison's Market. Frank Morrison called me last week, did I tell you? Doc shook his head, unpacking containers of Kung Pao chicken and fried rice. He was crying, Margaret continued, apologizing for his grandson, saying he'd failed as a guardian, asking if I could ever forgive him. I told him what you told me. We can't control what others do, only how we respond. She paused, emotion thick in her voice. He's testifying against Jake. Can you imagine? Testifying against your own grandson because it's the right thing to do. Takes courage, Doc acknowledged. So does walking into that market tomorrow. You want company? Actually, Margaret said, straightening her shoulders, I think I need to do this one alone. But can you be there afterward, in case I fall apart? Always, Doc promised. The next morning, Margaret dressed carefully in her favorite blue cardigan and comfortable shoes. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing a woman who had survived, who was healing, who was fighting her way back to herself. She picked up her cane, more for confidence now than necessity, and walked out her front door. The walk to Morrison's Market took 20 minutes. Passing the spot where the attack happened made her heart race and her breathing quicken, but she kept moving. When she finally pushed open the door to the market, Frank Morrison looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face showing surprise and something like relief. Margaret, he said, his voice rough. You came. I came, she confirmed, picking up a shopping basket. I need milk and bread, and I'm not going to let fear keep me from my routines anymore. Frank nodded, understanding more in that statement than the words themselves conveyed. As Margaret shopped, slowly, carefully, but determinedly, other regular customers recognized her. Word had spread about the attack, and several approached to express their concern and support. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 streets over hugged her carefully. We've been so worried about you, Mija. Mr. Patterson, the retired accountant who always bought too much candy, shook her hand solemnly. You're tougher than you look, Margaret Thompson. When Margaret brought her items to the counter, Frank refused her money. No charge, not today, not ever. Frank, I appreciate the gesture, but I can pay for my groceries, Margaret said firmly but kindly. What I need from you is to keep running this market, keep serving this community, and stop carrying guilt that isn't yours to carry. Frank's eyes grew wet. You're a better person than I deserve, Margaret. We all deserve grace, Frank. All of us. Margaret walked home with her bag of groceries, her head held high. When she rounded the corner onto her street, she saw Doc sitting on her porch steps, waiting as promised. He stood as she approached, taking in her triumphant expression. You did it. I did it, Margaret confirmed, and then she did fall apart. But these tears were different. These were tears of victory, of reclaiming her life, of proving to herself that she was stronger than her trauma. Doc held her while she cried, patient and steady, until the storm passed. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with tissues he'd handed her, she laughed through her tears. I'm okay, she said. I'm actually okay. I never doubted it, Doc replied with a gentle smile. December arrived in Phoenix with cooler temperatures and Christmas decorations appearing on houses throughout the neighborhood. Margaret's physical recovery was nearly complete. She graduated from using a cane to walking unassisted, though she kept one handy for particularly long distances. Her emotional recovery was progressing steadily through continued therapy and the unwavering support of her Desert Guardian family. The trial was now only 3 weeks away, and Margaret had been meeting regularly with the prosecuting attorney, Lisa Henderson, to prepare her testimony. Lisa was a sharp, efficient woman in her early 40s who specialized in violent crimes. Tyler Brooks's defense attorney is going to try to paint you as confused or mistaken about what happened, Lisa explained during one of their preparation sessions at the prosecutor's office. They'll point out your age, suggest your memory isn't reliable. How do you feel about that? Margaret straightened in her chair, a flash of the old school teacher authority showing through. I may be 73, but my mind is perfectly sound. I can tell them exactly what happened, down to the smell of cigarettes on Tyler Brooks' breath and the brand name on Jake Morrison's sneakers. Lisa smiled. That's the energy I need you to bring to the stand. Don't let them intimidate you. But 3 days later, everything changed. Margaret was at home, decorating a small Christmas tree, her first attempt at holiday cheer in years, inspired by Christine, who'd insisted that healing included celebrating life, when her phone rang. It was Detective Price, and her tone immediately put Margaret on alert. Mrs. Thompson, I need to inform you of a development. Tyler Brooks made bail this morning. Margaret's hand gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. How? I thought the judge denied bail. His family hired an expensive attorney who filed an appeal and got a different judge to reconsider. He's out on a $50,000 bond with an ankle monitor and orders to stay away from you. But I wanted you to know immediately. After hanging up, Margaret stood frozen in her living room, the Christmas ornament still clutched in her hand. The fear she'd been working so hard to overcome came rushing back, cold and paralyzing. She called Doc. He arrived within 15 minutes along with Jessica and Raymond. Margaret told them the news, her voice shaking. He's out there. The man who attacked me is just out there. With an ankle monitor and strict court orders, Doc reminded her firmly. If he comes within 500 feet of you, he goes straight back to jail. People violate restraining orders all the time, Margaret said, her teacher's knowledge of statistics serving her poorly in this moment. What if he... Then he'll have to go through us, Raymond interrupted, his deep voice carrying absolute certainty. Margaret, I'm moving into your guest room until the trial is over. You can't do that, Margaret protested. You have your own life, your own home. I'm single, my house is 20 minutes from here and I can work from anywhere, Raymond countered. Non-negotiable. You need someone here at night and I'm volunteering. Jessica nodded in agreement. And I'll adjust my schedule to be here during the days Raymond has to be on job sites. We'll create a rotation. You're not going to be alone." Over the next hour, the Desert Guardians mobilized with military precision. Danny upgraded Margaret's security system to include cameras at every entrance. Christine created a contact chain so that if Margaret activated her panic button, every club member within a 10-mile radius would be notified instantly. Patricia, with her police connections, arranged for patrol units to do extra drive-bys of Margaret's house, and Doc made it his mission to ensure Margaret didn't spiral back into the fear that had controlled her life immediately after the attack. "You've come too far to let Tyler Brooks steal your peace again," he told her that evening, after the others had left, and Raymond had settled into the guest room. "He took your safety once. Don't let him take your courage too." "I'm trying," Margaret whispered. "But Doc, what if he comes here? What if he wants revenge for me, pressing charges? Then he'll find a house protected by people who know how to fight and a woman who's a lot stronger than he remembers," Doc said firmly. "Fear is his weapon, Margaret. Don't give it to him." The next 2 weeks tested Margaret's resolve. Every sound made her jump. Every car that drove down her street made her peek through the curtains. Raymond's presence helped, his calm, steady demeanor, and the fact that he was a former Army Ranger provided comfort. But the hypervigilance exhausted her. Dr. Brennan added an extra therapy session per week. "This is a setback, but not a permanent one," she assured Margaret. "Your brain is responding to a legitimate threat, re-emerging. We'll work through this." The Desert Guardians' presence became even more constant. At least 2 club members were always nearby, either at Margaret's house or on standby. Grace Chen organized a meal train, so Margaret didn't have to worry about cooking. Victoria Martinez, the teacher, came by to share lesson plan memories and remind Margaret of the hundreds of children whose lives she'd touched during her career. "You taught my nephew," Victoria revealed one afternoon. "Anthony Martinez. He had you for 3rd grade in 2009. He's in college now, studying to be a teacher because of you. You changed his life, Margaret. That's your legacy." These reminders of her impact, of the life she'd lived before the attack, helped Margaret maintain perspective. She wasn't just a victim. She was a retired teacher, a widow who'd loved deeply, a woman who'd contributed to her community for decades. On December 18th, 1 week before Christmas and 2 weeks before the trial, Margaret received an unexpected visitor. She was sitting on her porch with Raymond. They'd made it a habit to spend the late afternoons outside, refusing to let fear keep her imprisoned indoors. When a sleek BMW pulled up to the curb, a woman in her 30s emerged, dressed professionally in a business suit. She approached hesitantly, her expression a mixture of determination and discomfort. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Brenda Brooks, Tyler's mother." Raymond instantly stood up, positioning himself slightly in front of Margaret, but Margaret touched his arm and shook her head. "It's okay." Brenda stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, making no move to come closer without invitation. "I know I have no right to be here. If you want me to leave, I will. But I needed to say something to your face." "I'm listening," Margaret said carefully. Brenda's composure cracked, tears spilling down her carefully made-up face. "I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply, unforgivably sorry for what my son did to you. I've failed as a mother. I've made excuses for Tyler his whole life, blamed his father for leaving, blamed his friends, blamed everyone but him and myself. And now you're the one paying for my failures." Margaret was silent, processing this unexpected apology. "I posted his bail because he's my son and I love him, but Mrs. Thompson, I know he's guilty. I know what he did was evil. And I want you to know that I hope they lock him up for a long time. Maybe prison will finally force him to face consequences I never enforced." Brenda wiped at her tears helplessly. I needed you to hear from me that not everyone in his family thinks what he did was okay. Some of us know exactly how wrong it was." "Mrs. Brooks," Margaret said quietly, Thank you for coming here. That took courage. It took me too long, Brenda countered bitterly. If I'd had this courage years ago, maybe Tyler would be a different person. Maybe you wouldn't have been hurt. Or maybe Tyler makes his own choices, and those choices are his responsibility, Margaret replied, echoing the wisdom Doc had shared with her. I appreciate your apology. I hope Tyler learns from this, but whether he does or not isn't on you anymore. You can only control your own actions going forward. Brenda nodded, seeming both relieved and devastated by Margaret's grace. Will you be at the trial? Yes, I'll be testifying. Then I'll be there too, Brenda said firmly. In the gallery, supporting justice, not my son's lies. It's the least I can do. After Brenda left, Raymond looked at Margaret with open admiration. How do you do that? She's the mother of the man who attacked you, and you gave her compassion. Margaret was quiet for a moment, thinking, because holding on to hate hurts me more than it hurts anyone else. And because Dr. Brennan is helping me understand that healing isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about not letting what happened define everything going forward. That evening, when Doc arrived for his usual visit, Margaret told him about Brenda Brooks' visit. He listened carefully, then nodded slowly. You're going to be okay, Margaret. More than okay. You're going to be the person who came out the other side of trauma stronger and wiser. I hope so, Margaret said, because I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of Tyler Brooks having any power over my life. Then let's make sure you're ready for that trial, Doc suggested. Tell me what you're going to say when you take the stand. Practice it until the words feel natural. They spent the next 2 hours in testimony rehearsal, with Doc playing both the prosecutor and the defense attorney. He asked hard questions, challenged her memory, and pushed her to stay calm and clear. By the time they finished, Margaret felt more prepared and more confident. Christmas came, and Margaret spent it surrounded by desert guardians at the clubhouse, a large converted warehouse that served as their meeting place and community center. There was food, music, gift exchanges, and the kind of warm chaos that comes with a large, loving family. Grace Chen had organized a secret Santa exchange, and Margaret's gift came from Danny, a beautifully framed photo of the moment on Cypress Avenue when Doc had helped her up after the attack. She hadn't known anyone had captured that moment, but there it was. Doc's strong hand extended, her own reaching up to grasp it, the other desert guardians surrounding them protectively. I took it on my phone, Danny explained. I thought someday you might want to remember not the attack, but what came after, how you weren't alone. Margaret cried, of course, but these tears were becoming familiar, tears of gratitude, of belonging, of healing. Thank you, she told the room at large, her voice strong despite the emotion. All of you. You gave me back my life. You gave us purpose, Kodiak responded, raising his glass. To Margaret, the toughest desert guardian who never had to ride a bike to earn her patch. The room erupted in cheers and laughter, but beneath the celebration, everyone knew what was coming. The trial started in 9 days, and Margaret would have to face her attackers in court. The real test of her healing was about to begin. January 6th arrived cold and clear, the kind of Phoenix winter morning that reminded residents why they endured the brutal summers. Margaret stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down her navy blue dress, the one she'd worn to school board meetings and parent-teacher conferences, her armor of authority and respectability. Her hands were shaking. You ready? Raymond called from the living room, where he'd been staying for the past month. No, Margaret answered honestly, walking out to meet him. But I'm going anyway. The Maricopa County Superior Court building was imposing and official, all concrete and glass, reflecting the morning sun. As Margaret walked toward the entrance, she wasn't alone. On her left was Doc, steady and protective. On her right was Jessica, offering quiet support. Behind them came Raymond, Christine, Danny, Patricia, Grace, Victoria, Kenneth, and at least 20 other desert guardians, all wearing their vests, all walking in formation. People stared. Security guards tensed briefly before Patricia, with her retired police credentials, had a quick word with them. The message was clear. These people were here to support a victim, and they would cause no trouble. Inside the courtroom, the Desert Guardians filled 2 entire rows. Their presence, leather patches, solidarity was impossible to ignore. Margaret drew strength from knowing they were behind her. Lisa Henderson, the prosecutor, met Margaret in a small conference room before proceedings began. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Margaret admitted, "but ready." "Good. Remember what we practiced. Answer only the question asked. Speak clearly, and don't let the defense attorney rattle you." Judge Morrison, no relation to Jake Morrison incidentally, runs a tight courtroom. She won't allow bullying. At 9 a.m. sharp, Judge Patricia Morrison called the court to order. She was a black woman in her 50s, with an air of absolute authority. Both Tyler Brooks and Jake Morrison sat at the defense table with their respective attorneys, dressed in suits that were clearly meant to make them look respectable. Tyler kept his eyes down. Jake fidgeted nervously. Margaret's testimony wouldn't come until the afternoon, after opening statements and testimony from first responders. She sat in the gallery with the Desert Guardians, listening as Detective Price laid out the evidence, video footage, witness statements, physical evidence. During the lunch recess, the Desert Guardians took Margaret to a nearby cafe. She couldn't eat, but Doc made her drink water and take deep breaths. "You've already survived the worst thing they could do to you," he reminded her. "Today is just talking about it. You've got this." At 1:30 p.m., Lisa Henderson called Margaret Thompson to the stand. Margaret walked to the witness box on legs that felt wooden, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. When she finally sat down and looked out at the courtroom, she saw Tyler Brooks staring at her with an expression of sullen anger. For just a moment, fear spiked through her. Then she shifted her gaze slightly and saw Doc in the gallery, his eyes locked on hers, his nod almost imperceptible. "You've got this." "Mrs. Thompson, can you please tell the court what happened on October 15th of last year?" Lisa Henderson's voice was gentle but clear. Margaret took a breath and began. She told the story chronologically, clearly, without embellishment. She described the heat of the day, the weight of the grocery bags, the moment she first heard Tyler's voice. She described the fear, the physical assault, the pain of hitting the concrete. "And then what happened?" Lisa prompted. "Then I heard motorcycles," Margaret said, her voice gaining strength. "The Desert Guardians arrived and stopped the attack. They saved my life." The cross-examination was harder. Tyler's defense attorney, a slick man named Derek Walsh, tried every tactic to undermine her testimony. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true that you're 73 years old and your memory might not be as reliable as it once was?" "My memory is excellent," Margaret responded firmly. "I can tell you that Tyler Brooks was wearing a black hoodie with a tear on the left sleeve, that he smelled of cigarette smoke and something chemical, possibly methamphetamine, and that when he grabbed my purse, the force of it caused me to spin counterclockwise before falling." "Isn't it possible you're confused about which young man actually took your purse?" "No, it was Tyler Brooks. He held it up triumphantly after ripping it from my shoulder." Margaret met Walsh's eyes steadily. "I spent 37 years teaching third graders to be accountable for their actions. I know exactly who attacked me and why I'm in this courtroom." Several jurors nodded slightly. Walsh, sensing he wasn't getting anywhere, changed tactics. "Mrs. Thompson, you've become quite close with this motorcycle club, haven't you? Isn't it possible they've influenced your testimony?" Margaret's expression hardened. "The Desert Guardians prevented a robbery from becoming a murder. They stayed with me in the hospital, helped me recover, and gave me back my sense of safety and community." But they didn't change one single fact of what happened that day. Tyler Brooks and Jake Morrison attacked an elderly woman for her purse, which contained $17 and my late husband's wedding ring. Those are the facts, regardless of who my friends are. The courtroom was silent. Even Judge Morrison looked impressed. Walsh wrapped up quickly after that, clearly recognizing he'd lost this battle. Over the next 2 days, other witnesses testified. Doc, Jessica, Danny, Raymond, Christine. Detective Price presented the video evidence. Frank Morrison took the stand and, with tears in his eyes, testified that his grandson Jake had admitted the crime to him. Brenda Brooks sat in the gallery every day, never once looking at her son, her presence a silent testament to choosing truth over blind loyalty. On the third day, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts for both Tyler Brooks and Jake Morrison. The courtroom erupted in relieved conversation before Judge Morrison restored order. At sentencing 2 weeks later, both defendants received substantial prison time. Tyler Brooks got 8 years. Jake Morrison got 6 years due to his lesser role and genuine remorse. Judge Morrison's words during sentencing were pointed and powerful. "You targeted a vulnerable member of our community for financial gain. You showed no mercy, no empathy, no humanity. Mrs. Thompson could have died from her injuries. Instead, she survived, and not only survived, but has shown remarkable courage throughout this process. You will serve every day of your sentences thinking about the person you harmed." Outside the courthouse after sentencing, Margaret stood surrounded by desert guardians and news cameras. A reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Mrs. Thompson, how do you feel about the verdicts?" Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I feel that justice was served. But more importantly, I feel grateful. What started as the worst day of my life led to discovering a family I didn't know I needed. The Desert Guardians didn't just save me that day, they helped me save myself." The clip went viral. By evening, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. Motorcycle club saves elderly woman becomes her family. The Desert Guardians received hundreds of messages from people across the country, many from other seniors who felt vulnerable and alone. This led to an unexpected development. 3 weeks after the trial concluded, Kodiak called a special club meeting and invited Margaret to attend. "We've been getting a lot of attention," he began, addressing the room full of members, "and a lot of requests. Seniors from all over Phoenix, all over Arizona really, asking if we might extend what we did for Margaret to others who need support." Grace Chen stood up, pulling up a PowerPoint presentation. "I've been researching grant opportunities and partnership possibilities. What if we formalized this, created a program where Desert Guardians are paired with isolated seniors in our community, helping with errands, home repairs, just being present? We could call it the Guardian Angel Program." The room erupted in enthusiastic discussion. Patricia Walsh suggested partnering with the police department to identify seniors who'd been victims of crime. Victoria Martinez proposed connecting with senior centers to find those most in need. Danny offered to create a website and screening process. Margaret listened to all of this with growing wonder. What had happened to her, the trauma, the rescue, the healing, was transforming into something bigger, something that could help countless others. "Margaret," Kodiak said, turning to her, "we'd like you to be the program director. You'd work with Grace on organization, help train members on senior needs, be the face of the program. What do you think?" Margaret was speechless for a moment. At 73, after retiring, after losing Harold, after believing her meaningful contributions to the world were behind her, she was being offered purpose again. "I think it's the best idea I've ever heard," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm honored to help build it." Over the next 6 months, the Guardian Angel program took shape. The Desert Guardians partnered with the Phoenix Police Department, the Area Agency on Aging, and several community organizations. They created a careful vetting process for both volunteers and seniors, established protocols and training, and launched with a pilot program of 20 matched pairs. Margaret threw herself into the work with energy she hadn't felt in years. She interviewed potential participants, developed training materials drawing on her teaching experience, and became the program's spokesperson. Local news did several follow-up stories, and funding flowed in from community grants and private donors. Doc remained her closest friend and confidant. Their evening porch conversations continued, though now they often discussed program logistics along with personal matters. Gradually, those who knew them best began to suspect that their connection had deepened into something beyond friendship. It was Christine who finally called it out one evening when the core group, Doc, Jessica, Raymond, Christine, Danny, and Margaret, gathered at Margaret's house for dinner. "So, are you two going to admit you're together? Or are we supposed to keep pretending we don't notice?" Christine asked bluntly, gesturing between Doc and Margaret. Margaret blushed deeply, looking down at her plate. Doc, typically stoic, actually smiled. "We're taking things slow," Doc said carefully. "Given everything that's happened and the age difference." "Age difference?" Jessica interrupted. "Doc, you're 60. Margaret's 73. You're both adults who've lived full lives. If you care about each other, who gives a damn about 13 years? "I give a damn," Margaret said quietly, "because I don't want to be a burden. I don't want Doc to feel obligated because he saved me." "Margaret," Doc interrupted gently, reaching for her hand. "You're not a burden. You're the person who gave me a reason to wake up excited about life again. You're brilliant, funny, kind, and tougher than half the Marines I served with. If anything, I'm worried you're too good for an old broken-down corpsman." Raymond laughed. "You're both idiots. You care about each other. Stop overthinking it." Margaret looked at Doc, really looked at him, seeing past the rescuer to the man, someone who'd experienced loss and pain, who'd found purpose in helping others, who'd been patient and kind and present through her worst moments. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. The table went silent. Doc's hand tightened on hers. "I know I'm falling in love with you," he replied. "Have been for months." Christine raised her beer bottle. "Finally." "Okay, everyone, drinks up. We're celebrating these two stubborn people admitting what we all already knew." Life settled into a new normal over the following year. The Guardian Angel program expanded to serve over 100 seniors across the Phoenix metropolitan area. Success stories poured in, isolated elders finding companionship, crime victims receiving support, families gaining peace of mind, knowing their loved ones had additional checking in on them. Margaret and Doc's relationship deepened and became official. Harold's photo still had a place of honor on Margaret's mantle. Doc would never try to replace him. But next to it now sat a photo of Margaret and Doc at a Desert Guardians charity ride, both smiling genuinely. On the first anniversary of the attack, Margaret organized a community event in the same neighborhood where it had occurred. The Desert Guardians set up a booth to recruit volunteers. Local police did a safety presentation. Senior services organizations offered resources, and Margaret herself spoke to a crowd of over 200 people. "A year ago, I was attacked on a street not far from here," she began, her voice strong and clear. "I thought my life was effectively over. I was hurt, terrified, and alone. But then 5 motorcycles came around that corner, and everything changed." She gestured to Doc, Jessica, Raymond, Christine, and Danny, all standing in the front row. "These people didn't just stop a crime. They showed me that family isn't only blood, it's the people who show up when you need them most. They taught me that trauma doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter. And they inspired a program that's now helping hundreds of seniors across our city find connection, safety, and community." Margaret paused, scanning the crowd. "If you're isolated, if you're scared, If you think no one cares, you're wrong. There are people who want to help. Reach out. Accept support. And when you're able, pay it forward. That's how we build community. That's how we heal. The applause was thunderous. After the event, as the sun set over Phoenix and volunteers packed up booths, Margaret stood with Doc watching the bustle of activity. "You did this," Doc said quietly. "You took the worst day of your life and turned it into something beautiful." "We did this," Margaret corrected. "All of us together." Frank Morrison approached, moving slowly with a cane of his own, age catching up to him. "Margaret, I just wanted to thank you again. For forgiving me, for forgiving my family, for being the kind of person who responds to darkness with light." "We're good, Frank," Margaret assured him. "Jake's in a prison drug treatment program, right? How's he doing?" "Better," Frank said with cautious hope. "He writes to me sometimes, taking responsibility, facing what he did. I don't know if he'll ever be truly okay, but at least he's trying." After Frank walked away, Margaret leaned into Doc's side. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You know what I've learned this year?" Margaret asked. "What's that?" "That we're never too old to start over, never too broken to heal, never too alone to find family." She looked up at him. "I spent 5 years thinking my life was winding down, that all my meaningful chapters were behind me. I was wrong." "So what's next?" Doc asked with a smile. Margaret grinned, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Well, I've been thinking. The Guardian Angel program is running smoothly now. Grace has the administrative side handled, and we have trained volunteers. So maybe—" She paused dramatically. "Maybe it's time you taught me to ride a motorcycle." Doc's eyes widened. "You want to learn to ride? I'm an honorary desert guardian, aren't I? Seems like I should actually be able to ride with my family." Margaret's smile was radiant. "Besides, I'm 74 years old. If not now, when?" Doc laughed, a full, genuine laugh that drew the attention of nearby desert guardians. "All right then. First lesson is next week, but I'm warning you, I'm a tough instructor. Marcus Callahan. I taught 8-year-olds for 37 years. I think I can handle you." Jessica, overhearing this exchange, whooped with joy. "Margaret's learning to ride. Everyone, Margaret's learning to ride." The desert guardians gathered around, cheering and offering unsolicited advice. Plans were made, bets were placed on how long before Margaret got her license, and joy filled the space where trauma had once lived. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Margaret looked around at the faces of people who'd become family, this unexpected, leather-wearing, motorcycle-riding, fierce and loyal family who'd appeared when she needed them most. She thought about Harold and knew he'd approve. He'd always told her that life was meant to be lived fully, right up until the last moment. She was honoring that now. The attack had happened, the fear had been real, the pain had been genuine, but none of that had won. What won was love, community, courage, and the fundamental human truth that we are better together than apart. Margaret Thompson, retired third-grade teacher, widow, survivor, and now Guardian Angel Program Director and Honorary Desert Guardian, was exactly where she was supposed to be, surrounded by family, healing, and healed, living proof that cowards might attack, but courage, love, and community always triumph in the end. And somewhere on the streets of Phoenix, 5 motorcycles rode into the sunset, ready to show up the next time someone needed help. Because that's what family does.